Over the past 3 decades, we've talked the truth about what is happening in nursing, like all of it. The workplace violence, the system-induced trauma, the insufficient resources, the organizational betrayal. We've talked about your nervous system, your cells, your mitochondria, and why you've tried everything that hasn't worked. We've introduced the frameworks, the science, and the hope. And you're probably thinking, I get it. I'm starting to get it now. But how do I actually do this? How do I heal from nurse trauma while I'm still working in the system that's causing it? Well, today I'm going to walk you through that journey. Not necessarily with theory or concepts, but in a real world kind of messy, non-linear path from breaking point to thriving. Today, I'll share Rodrigo's story. He's a nurse who came to me 2 years ago, drowning, and now he's leading his unit's transformation. That's how it's done. They told you it's burnout. They lied. It's nurse trauma. Your body never lied. The system did. I'm Dr. Lori Laws. Let's heal the root cause together. Two years ago, Rodrigo reached out. He was finishing his first year as a nurse, med-surg, night shift, at a large urban hospital, and he was drowning. Rodrigo became a nurse for all the right reasons. He's a deeply spiritual man. Faith is the foundation of everything in his life. His connection to something greater, his sense of purpose, his why. The why of his healer's heart. He became a nurse to help people heal, to make a difference, to serve. And in nursing school, they taught him all about holistic care, treating the whole person, body, mind, spirit. He was so ready, so full of hope. And then he went into practice. The reality of med-surg night shift kicked in. 6 to 8 patients, sometimes more, constantly short-staffed. Symptom management, med passes, charting, interventions. There wasn't any time for anything remotely healing in the way that his healer's heart was guiding him to care for his patients. There was no time to sit with a patient, to hold space, to offer the kind of care he went to nursing school to provide. Every shift was a sprint, a scramble, a barely contained crisis. And the culture, the toxic positivity everywhere. We're a family. We're in this together. Just keep smiling. Patient satisfaction scores matter. But underneath, it was a broken system and traumatized nurses who, through their own dysregulated nervous system, were gossiping and backstabbing. Leadership engaged in empathy manipulation masked as dedication. So Rodrigo's nervous system did the only thing that it could do. It adapted the only way it knew how to. He lived in sympathetic overdrive, but he couldn't fight the system, and he certainly couldn't flee and abandon his patients, so all he could do is fawn. He became a people pleaser, an overgiver, saying yes to every extra shift, every additional task, every impossible request, never setting boundaries, never saying no, never advocating for himself. Because somewhere deep in his nervous system, he learned that compliance equals safety, that if he just does enough, gives enough, sacrifices enough, maybe the system will stop hurting him. But it doesn't work that way. His body didn't know that yet, though. And he started to enter into a crisis. By the end of his first year, Rodrigo was in full-fledged crisis, professional crisis. He hated his job. He was providing care that violated everything that he believed about healing in the holistic, whole person sense of the word. He was in a spiritual crisis. He couldn't feel his connection to God anymore. His prayers, well, delivered daily, felt hollow. His meditation practice felt empty. He was going through the motions, and he didn't understand why. He was in existential crisis. Was becoming a nurse the worst decision of his life? And he felt trapped. He had just signed a lease on his very first apartment, but he couldn't afford to stay. He couldn't afford to stay there unless he continued in his practice. Every shift ended the same way, slumped over his steering wheel in the parking lot, wanting to scream, wanting to cry, unable to do either. Just hollow and utterly alone. He reached out to his spiritual communities. He doubled down on his practices, but nothing was really landing, because you can't pray your way out of a dysregulated nervous system. It helps alleviate the symptoms, sure, but you can't meditate your way out of a trauma response. So he had a moment of clarity. One night, he came across an article that I'd written somewhere. It was about nurse trauma, about the difference between nurse trauma and burnout, and that really burnout is actually a symptom cluster of nurse trauma. And something inside of him clicked. This wasn't a personal failing. This wasn't a crisis of faith. This was trauma, occupational trauma, nurse-specific trauma. And then, well, maybe if it's trauma, then maybe there's a way to heal it. That's when he reached out to me. So I'm going to walk you through Rodrigo's story. Again, not his real name, but his story is being shared with permission. I'm going to walk you through his sort of nonlinear 2-year journey from the breaking point as a new grad to thriving and leading. So the first thing that Rodrigo did is he started to discover the true root cause. Because that's, as nurses, assessment is always the first thing. And he'd been told for a year that he was just burned out, that he needed to do better self-care and, be more resilient, manage his time better, and be better at work-life balance. But when we mapped his experience, his symptoms, and his situations, it was very clear that it wasn't burnout at all, that it was trauma, multiple trauma exposures, all at once, all the time. The workplace violence that he'd witnessed, system-induced trauma from being forced to provide substandard care, insufficient resource trauma from chronic understaffing, moral injury from the gap between the care he wanted to give, that he was trained and educated to give, and the care he was allowed to provide. Historical trauma from a toxic unit culture that had been there long before he arrived. And the deepest wound of all, existential trauma, the spiritual crisis. His entire sense of purpose had been shattered. And correctly identifying the root cause, the real root cause of nurse trauma, well, that changed everything. Because suddenly it wasn't about him being weak or failing. It was about him being injured. And injuries can heal. So we got him clear on what the root cause was, and he immediately took his assessment, the free assessment for nurse trauma symptoms. That's the second step in the healing pathway. He took the assessment and discovered that trauma was affecting every single wellness domain. In the physical, he was exhausted, had chronic headaches, GI issues, and to quote him, it's, "My body's a mess." In his cognitive capacity, he was brain foggy. He had difficulty concentrating and some memory challenges. Emotionally, he moved into sort of a toggle between feeling anxious and depressed, and he was feeling emotionally numb and detached, which broke his heart because he's like, I am such a loving, caring person, and I just can't. Behavioral, he was withdrawing from his friends and social situations. His relationships were starting to suffer a little bit. But the one that hit hardest was the existential crisis, spiritual trauma, because that was the foundation, the bedrock of his life. And the trauma, the nurse-specific trauma, had fractured that. So here's what the nurse assessment tells you and told Rodrigo, where to start. So we worked together in some of my programs to discover. He discovered that you can't heal everything all at once. Like so many nurses, we come in and think like, we're going to change a tire on our car and let's just, fix it and keep driving down the road. Well, that's not how trauma works. He looked at his assessment results and he made a strategic decision. Using the innate care plan approach we talked about earlier in a previous podcast episode, he was going to start with his spiritual domain because that was his strength, his foundation. He could restore his spiritual connection. Everything else would be better for him. So we went into that innate care plan on his first A. You remember, just as review, it's 3 A's plus B gets you to the 3 R's, and you want to be at the 3 R's. That's the goal. So the first A he worked on was awareness. He already had a robust spiritual practice, silent sitting, prayer, meditation. We just refined what he was already doing. Remember, we're leveraging the body's innate capacity for healing. It already knows how to do this. We're just supporting it in the process. We're positioning ourselves in right relationship for that healing to happen. He began integrating nervous system awareness into his spiritual awareness. During his meditation, he started noticing in what circuit or hybrid is my nervous system. Is it in green light, ventral vagal tone? Am I calm, grounded, centered, and present? Or am I in yellow light, in some sympathetic sort of activated state, maybe fight or flight, mobilized and feeling a little stressed? Or he would ask himself, am I in orange light? Am I in sympathetic overdrive, maxed out, running on fumes? Or am I in the red light zone of dorsal vagal collapse, shut down, feeling frozen, like I just am living life underwater, numb and detached. And over a few weeks, he got very good at recognizing in which state his nervous system was residing in real time and without judgment. That awareness practice became his compass. And then he learned about the second A and implemented that alongside the first, the second A being attending. We started building his recovery toolkit. Rodrigo already had self-care practices. All nurses do. We know how to do self-care. We don't have a knowledge deficit. He was exercising, eating right, getting good sleep, had healthy relationships. He was a good financial steward, and he was saving for his first house. But what he didn't have, and what most nurses don't have, were the practices to bring safety to his nervous system when it dysregulated. So we started with the microdoses matter practice, which can be done in as few as 30 seconds or longer, depending on context. 30 seconds of nurturance to the nervous system many times throughout the day. It's not a cure-all, but it gives enough nurturance to the nervous system to help keep it regulated. So what does that look like? Go ahead and join me in just a quick little 30-second practice. An a safe physical space if you have one. If not, imagine yourself putting in a bubble of safe energy field of golden light. Drop an energetic grounding cord from the root, your root chakra or your tailbone, into the earth while taking a few deep breaths. Let's just take 3 breaths together. Inhale, exhale, drop that cord in, inhale, exhale, keep noticing your feet on the floor. Last inhale and exhale, and feel your energy start to shift, probably from the head to somewhere below the neck. Now let's signal safety to the nervous system. I always have a grounding stone with me. Right now I'm wearing a necklace, or you can use a post earring, or I tuck a crystal in my pocket. Any artifact from nature will do. Connecting with nature is the quickest way to signal safety to your midbrain and the threat detector. Then close and soften the eyes and place one hand and then the other over the heart. Tap into the love that you are, the love that is here for you every waking moment, and tap into what matters to you most. That's the microdoses matter practice. Easy, can be done while you're sitting down to chart, as you're entering the med room, before you go into a meeting, as you move from one patient room to the next, or if you're a teacher like I am, before you start teaching that next segment. There's always a little segue that we can use to bring in a microdose of nervous system nurturance. And why do I call them the microdoses matters practice? Well, because they work. They worked for Rodrigo and they work for you too. They signal to the nervous system that you're safe right now in this moment, because the midbrain and the vagus nerve and the autonomic nervous system doesn't understand our thoughts or our words. That's why it's so important to signal safety in these ways. So Rodrigo did a brilliant job working on the first A of awareness, the second A of attending, which brought us to the third A of alignment. And this is the deep work. This is the work on his healer's heart. We explored the chasm between his inner world and his outer world. Inside, he was a healer, a whole person, holistic care provider, a servant of something greater than himself. But outside, he was working in a system that devalued everything he believed in, that reduced holistic nursing care to just a list of med passes, tasks, and interventions. They punished him for caring too much, or at least that's how it felt to him. The misalignment was killing him. So we started gently to correctly identify the wound and acknowledge the moral injury. And then we asked the question, what would alignment look like? This is misalignment. How you want to be and do in your inner world is not matching with your outer world. That's misalignment. So what would alignment look like? And the answer to that question is different for all of us. For Rodrigo, it meant that he didn't want to leave nursing. It meant finding ways to bring his values into his work, independent of the healthcare system or the unit. So we started working on his inner world, for healing always comes from within and then is reflected in the outer world. As one of my favorite mentors quips, if you get the inside right, the outside takes care of itself. Those are Eckhart Tolle's words. So we leaned into what was misaligned externally and attended to it internally. Most people try and just fix the externals. That's not where the shift happens. So with Rodrigo, it started with him taking care of himself fully, holistically, in the same manner that he wanted to care for his patients. He gave himself the microdoses and the micro moments of holistic nervous system nurturance. He gave himself permission to be who he is, to breathe. He gave himself permission to honor his biological needs. He gave himself permission to take his earned breaks, his legal breaks that he's required to take. He started to locate where the transition gaps, the micro moments, where were they embedded throughout his day, and he used them to repattern how he cared for himself. That's where he put his microdoses matters practice into those micro moments of transition. And he started to care for himself while he was working. That's the foundation. We can't pour from an empty cup, and even when our cup is full, we should be pouring from the saucer. The system was depleting him every hour, and it would bleed him out if he let it, metaphorically speaking, but no more. He took every micro moment he could to take care of himself. And then, without effort, the external shift started to occur. He could find 30 seconds of presence with a patient. He could offer a moment of prayer before a difficult procedure, or he could extend a kind word to a colleague. These weren't big gestures, but they were acts of alignment, of regulation. He had nurtured his nervous system back into green light ventral vagal tone. And every time he did a microdose, it translated into one for a patient. Day by day, his healer's heart started healing. And this is where the rubber meets the road. Rodrigo had the framework. He had the practices. Now he just needed to use them in real time, on the job, in the chaos. He started recognizing when he was dysregulated, when he was moving out of green light into yellow, orange, or red, and he started intervening, using the innate care plan practice. Not perfect, not every time, but increasingly so. He'd notice when he was in sympathetic overdrive, and he'd take 30 seconds to do a microdoses matter practice. So let's pause here for just a brief moment because I want to tell you something really exciting, and it's a limited invitation for you to join us in the Nervous System Reset live event, and the registration for that is open now. I only offer this opportunity a couple of times a year, and I want to make sure that you are there. Podcast listeners will receive priority registration. So head over to drlorilaws.com/reset. In fact, you can even pause and go register now, and then come back and we'll continue our podcast together. This event sells out almost every time, and I want to make sure that you get the live healing support that you need in a community of other nurses who are doing the same. This is how you can jumpstart and expedite that healing process. So again, it's drlorilaws.com/reset, and I'll see you there. And with that, let's get back to our program. It looked like he was reading something on his computer screen, but instead he was giving himself 30 seconds or a minute to be in an energetic, safe bubble to soften his eyes so he could nurture and nourish his nervous system. That orange light went to yellow, went to green, ventral vagal tone, and it fluctuates throughout the day many times, but the goal is to be mostly in green light, ventral vagal. He'd also start to notice when he was starting to fawn, to say yes to something he didn't have capacity for. But he'd catch himself. He'd answer with the no. He learned that no is a complete sentence. He didn't have to offer explanations or rationales or justify his decisions. He discovered that, no, my calendar is already fully committed that day, was a daily mantra. He'd noticed he was in freeze after a particularly hard shift. And instead of berating himself, he would offer radical acceptance. Okay, I'm in red light now. My body is protecting me. It's putting me in energy conservation mode, and I'm going to honor that. He'd go low and slow so that his system could defrost, so it could recover, so the energies that were stuck and frozen could come back online and start moving. But he needed to feel safe enough for that to happen. So he didn't force himself to the gym on leg day. Instead, he went home and did some stretching with his dog, who he took for a gentle stroll. And then his dog takes over his yoga mat every time, as I'm told, as Rodrigo's stories goes. Over the months, his window of tolerance, his regulation window widened. And when you're in the window of tolerance, You are predominantly in green ventral vagal with periodic yellow sympathetic as needed to respond to daily stressors. And he could handle more stress. He could handle more chaos and more challenge, all without dysregulating. Why? Because his nervous system was becoming safer. He was feeling safer because his nervous system was being seen, heard, nurtured, nourished, and regulated, which is how we're supposed to be. Then he arrived at step 5, which is where we sustain, ascend, and lead. And somewhere during Rodrigo's second year of practice, something really beautiful and big shifted. Rodrigo's healing stopped being a project. It became an integration, a way of life. He wasn't trying to heal anymore. He was living healed, embodied. His practices became automatic, second nature. They were just part of who he was. And that's when he started ascending. He moved to day shift, much better for his circadian rhythm and better for the relationships in his life. Soon thereafter, he was promoted to charge nurse, not because he was gunning for it, but because leadership really noticed that there was something different about him. He was calm, grounded, regulated, even when everything around him was seemingly in chaos. And he started leading, not formally, not with a title, but by virtue of being who he was, grounded and centered and regulated in his nervous system. He had capacity to be leading. He had capacity for leadership. Colleagues started asking him, "How are you so calm? How do you not get rattled?" And he started sharing about nervous system regulation, about the difference between trauma and burnout, about the practices that saved his life. That was the culture shift that was within him. And then things started to change in his external environment. And this is where it gets really beautiful. Oh, I get goosebumps every time I share this story. Rodrigo's unit started to change. The toxic positivity culture started cracking because Rodrigo modeled something different. Authentic connection, genuine care, regulated presence. Those things are only possible when you're in the green ventral vagal. And people responded. Nurses started checking in with each other, not with fake cheerfulness, but with real vulnerability. They started co-healing, co-regulating. When one nurse was dysregulated, others would just help them to regulate, offer support, even their own regulated nervous systems. So much of this happens below the prefrontal cortex. When someone was struggling, the team held space instead of shaming or blaming. It wasn't perfect, and it certainly wasn't every shift, but it was different, and the results spoke for themselves. Turnover on the unit dropped. The unit that used to hemorrhage nurses every few months stabilized, and other units started noticing. "What are you doing over there? Your team seems different," they would ask. That's step 5. That's what real, authentic leadership looks like after trauma healing. It's not loud, not flashy. It's just steady, regulated, grounded presence that transforms everything around it. So that's Rodrigo's story, and let me tell you about where he is now. He's just finishing his 3rd year in practice, still in med-surg, and he's a day shift charge nurse still. His colleagues call him the unit Buddha, not because he's perfect, not because he never gets stressed, but because he's almost always regulated, calm, grounded, unruffled by the chaos. So what's different now? Well, he has strong work-life balance, but he had that before. He still works his shifts, and then he goes home, but he doesn't take the trauma home with him. He practices whole-person nursing within the constraints of the system. He finds the micro moments there, too. The 36 seconds here, 2 minutes there, to be present, to offer healing, to offer the kind of care that he went into nursing to provide. His spiritual practice, well, it's stronger than ever. That connection he thought he'd lost forever, it's back and deeper than before. His healer's heart is restored. That sense of purpose, that why, well, it's alive again. And he's leading, not with a big fancy title, not with authority, but with his presence. He's teaching his colleagues how to navigate their own nervous systems. He models regulation. He holds space. He does regular microdoses matters practice and invites others to do the same. The unit culture has transformed from forced toxic positivity to genuine camaraderie and connection. They're co-healing and co-regulating together. And this has tremendous power and a profound ripple effect because the other units were noticing. They wanted what Rodrigo's unit has. They want that culture, that stability, that real sense of genuine, authentic teamwork. This is what happens when you heal nurse trauma. It doesn't just change you, it changes everyone around you, and they may not even know why. Because regulated nervous systems create safety for other nervous systems, all below the level of consciousness. Healing is contagious in the best sense of that word. So remember that question that Rodrigo in his existential crisis was asking? Was becoming a nurse the worst decision of my life? Well, here's what he told me recently. He said, becoming a nurse almost broke me, but healing from nurse trauma, that saved my life. And now I get to help others, not just patients, but my colleagues, my team, my loved ones. That is the journey. This is what the 5-step nurse trauma healing method in real life looks like. This is how you can integrate the innate care plan into your existing schedule. It's not an add-on or an extra. It's done in micro moments throughout the day. What we've talked today is not the theory, not the concepts, but rather real sustained transformative healing. From breaking point to unit Buddha. From fawning and people-pleasing to regulated, genuine leadership. From spiritual crisis to a restored healer's heart. Rodrigo's story is one of many, but it's also your story, because every nurse who heals from trauma follows this path in their own manner. You expose the root cause, you assess the damage, you create your blueprint, you master your window of tolerance, you sustain, ascend, and lead. Not all at once, not perfect, not stepwise or linearly, but step by step, layer by layer, spiral by spiral, practice by practice. Because your body already knows how to heal. It's been waiting for you. It's been waiting for you to create the condition it needs to do so. And those conditions start with one simple action, understanding where you are right now. Rodrigo started with the nurse trauma assessment 2 years ago. It showed him where the trauma was showing up in his life and where to start his healing process. That same assessment is available to you right now for free, and it only takes 2 minutes. Whether you're in your first year like Rodrigo was, or in your 15th, or even in your 30th. I am working with nurses who have been in practice over 30 years. No matter where you are, whether you're drowning or just starting to notice that the water is rising, this is where the healing starts. With correctly identifying it, seeing it clearly, and with taking that first important step. Enrollment is open right now for the Nervous System Reset for Nurses. This is our all-encompassing live event for cellular to spiritual healing that will change your life. Doors are only open for 2 weeks, so be sure to enroll now at drlorilaws.com/reset. Your healing starts today. From my healer's heart to yours, namaste.